it's not surprising that people have such a low view of Congress when it seems the president has a pretty low view of Congress. He seems to think that it's kind of a, if he feels like going through them, he will, or if he feels like rather allowing them to legislate. But if he doesn't want to, then he'll find a way around it. You laid out a bunch of instances of it. And I think that also the forces that tend to be arrayed against this kind of stuff come from the left. The people who say that an indefinite detention bill is absolutely outrageous, it should never have happened, a lot of them are on the left of the political spectrum, and while President Barack Obama has been in office, they've been much more hesitant to criticize him. There are some exceptions, but I think this administration has been able to get away with a tremendous amount because of that very issue. We've seen this with the NDAA. There were people who were saying that this wasn't even, that this was going to allow American citizens caught on U.S. soil to be detained for as long as the government decides without even a writ of habeas corpus, and there wasn't a complete outcry about this. I mean, to me, that's astounding, and it just comes down to the politics.
Well, and you don't have to be, you know, Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot to actually listen to the president in his own words. If you remember, if you recall, President Obama himself said that if Congress wouldn't do it, he would. And he actually asked his executives, his cabinet secretaries, to come up with a list of things that they could get done by executive order and do an end run around Congress. Now, I guess I feel, you know, I have a little bit of an ambivalence about that when, in fact, we do have federal agencies and they are tasked with carrying out laws and mandates and have that power, can exercise that power. However, when it seems to be explicit that the president is saying, I'm going to take those 2010 midterm election results and I'm going to upend them with my own will and I'm going to declare this publicly, and there's no pushback. I mean, it seems to me there ought to have been at the time.
A couple of weeks ago, we did a segment, may have just been a week ago, where we discussed the psychology of President Barack Obama. We discussed the psychology of liberalism in general, and we talked about the fact, or at least I did, that at the core of liberalism is the psychological trait of hubris. It's really not about civil liberties, but the left really isn't a great, staunch defender of civil liberties. And I give you evidence the last 3 years, right?
But they pretend to be, though. Well, they're the ones that usually say, and you know, the ACLU is certainly not a right-wing organization.
They beat up Bush about executive signing orders. They beat up Bush about
Obama. He campaigned against them.
He campaigned against them, and things like the NDAA of detaining possibly American citizens without cause or justification or due process. What you would have thought was exactly against everything President Barack Obama not only campaigned on but stood for.
Well, the Attorney General is going to have that.
What it reveals is what the left largely stands for is themselves. I can do this better. Put me in charge. My competency exceeds all other. If I'm in charge, it will be okay. Forget what I said about civil liberties.
Their status, but also, you know, Congress has now created this habit where they'll pass overbroad laws, like the NDAA, by the way, and then they'll just hope that the federal courts sort this out. It gives them a degree of political cover. There was one point where they were discussing, so these are the legislatures, and you had Senator Rand Paul saying, this is egregious, this violates civil liberties, and John McCain acted like that was a crazy thing to say. The law should be clear. We should know if it applies to U.S. citizens or not. The fact that they pass this and say, somebody will bring a suit and the federal courts will figure this out for us.
Let me just say this. My point is not that there's not hubris on the right. There is hubris on the right.
Thank you for clarifying.
However, it's endemic to the ideology on the left.
The statists on the left, yes.
I'm wondering if you brought more specificity to these laws, though. If you were actually able to single out what these people are talking about in terms of, I'm trying to find the substantial support of al-Qaeda, for example. I look at that. I don't know what that means. That you need to be more specific.
Or does that mean sending them money?
I'm wondering, though, if you were to bring that kind of specificity to these kind of things, would you have much more broad support for
There already are laws. There's material support to a terrorist organization, which is 10 years in federal prison under U.S. code. So those already exist. This was broadening it out and again, leaving a whole lot of leeway, which now the courts, I mean, the judge's decision, this, you know, when you look at certain parts of it, says that the First Amendment cannot be legislated away. I actually was pretty excited about this. I think the judge's decision in this case was absolutely spot on.
Well, Emily, not on this list, which I think is perhaps one of the biggest overreaches of our federal government, was the HHS mandate that Catholic institutions would have to subsidize birth control, even though it flies in the face of their religious practice, and that our own government then said, we will define what is religious practice, and we will say that a Catholic-run hospital is not an expression of religious practice. I'm like, what in the world? We are actually going to allow our government to define how people choose to express their religious principles? This, to me, was shocking, but we're having a 50-50 debate on this. 50% of this country apparently thinks that's okay.
And I think we're hearing two different things. We're having a debate about administrative law. Do we make laws specific, or do we let them be vague and just hope that our political leaders make good decisions, and they are, just make arbitrary judgments in the right way. And then also, how prescriptive can the government be? Can the government say that you, as a religious organization, have to fund X, Y, or Z? So I think these are very important debates that we see really distinct differences between different parties and different candidates.
And distinct differences in the reaction to the media to what Barack Obama is doing. If a Republican was doing this, there would be massive outrage.